It is my great pleasure to introduce to you Caroline Swanson, who we all call Swanee around here. Swanee was a Master's in Fine Arts, Creative Writing, and Poetics major who graduated in 2016. Swanee is a poet, scribe, activist from Sacramento, California. She is currently developing a youth mentorship program with Queer Asterisk, a nonprofit dedicated to therapeutic services for the LGBTQIA community in Boulder, Colorado. Please, everyone, let's welcome Swanee and her Mythopoetic Pedagogy.
How are you all doing? I just had to bring some of my friends here to the stage. All right. So I'm going to do something for you guys that I haven't done in a while, which is perform some poetry from memory. So if I could, I'll ask for your loving support, like in the spoken word community. If it looks like I've maybe forgotten what I'm going to say, pause too long, just like give a little snaps. Can I hear you guys give some snaps? Cool. Also have the poem in my boot in case I need it, so I'll just do that. All right. This is the story of Yolo Swaggins, who left his home one day in the cozy little shire, looking for a place, questing for a place that reached a little higher. He moved to a place where they spoke the common tongue, but only cared about getting hung, about popping pills and chasing thrills and flipping dollar bills, like ordering coffee like they know the drill, and not like they're rattling nickels and dimes like songs in a cup, but using them to wheel and deal just to get a decent meal. This shit's so real, it's ill, like sick, like driving over roadkill. And Yolo's life has gotten so gritty. He's trying to keep up, he thinks he's pretty witty, but he lives in a wasted mire, pays no heed to the crier. He's drugging and drinking, he's sagging off wagons. Down in the ditch, he dreams of his own inner dragons. He's going out like a busted tire, spent rubber over too much road and broken under heavy loads and run down by debts, and that way is closed and this way dead ends. And the only way to get out alive is to dive. One long deep breath to the other side of regrets. Because when you only live once, you can't wait for death. So I wrote that poem, just to give a little context, about the same time I was actually writing my application to come here at Naropa. I have a couple people to thank for that poem, Yolo Swaggins. And the first person is myself, because I really felt like Yolo Swaggins, trying to be cool, trying to do my thing, trying to move with progressions and, feeling a little stuck. And that's when my calling to Naropa really, really happened. The second person I have to thank is J.R.R. Tolkien. And if you want to know anything about me, really know that I really approach the world as a reader of Tolkien, and not just of his fantasy, but of his scholarly work and languages and permutations. And the man, he was a soldier, but he was also a warrior. So I learned a lot from Tolkien, and for that, I really have to thank my parents. We weren't a perfect family, but the really wonderful thing about them was how much they placed importance and value and appreciation on art and education. And so some of my first memories as my family are sitting on their bed reading together. And there was a really, really specific moment where, honestly, I was probably a little too young to be listening to the trilogy. But yeah, I was, somewhere between 4 and 6 years old, and just terrified that the ring race were going to swoop down and get Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin before they even crossed the Brandywine. But then I had a really significant realization, a critical moment, where I realized, oh wait, we're only that far into the book, and there are 2 more. So this is not the end. So I just sat through the dark moment, and just waited for it to pass and to unfold. Fast forward years later, and I had another very, very critical moment when it came to my own pedagogy, or how I taught and learned myself. And I'm doing this in an experiential style because that's really what we teach here at Naropa. So, I was sitting in my room. I was feeling really, really desperate because I was doing my chemistry homework, and I'm a words people, math is, I just couldn't do the math. And I was so distraught and desperate and so full of grief because I knew that if my mother was alive, that she would have been there to help me. Now, she had passed away just probably months before. When I was 14, she was diagnosed with acute myelogenous leukemia, stage 6. So really it was a 1% survival rate. And I was like, if one person can do it, it's my mom. And she was really a wonderful person, and I owe it all to her, and my father too. But her death is what really made me become a poet, because in that moment of my despair, I just was like, well, I'm not getting chemistry homework done tonight. But there was something inside of me, there was some impetus. Perhaps it was her spirit communicating through me, and I just picked up a piece of paper, and I picked my pen back up, and I wrote a poem. And it was about, it was first called Despair, because that's how I was feeling. The beautiful thing about memory is that you can keep going back into that and, using it in positive ways, which I'll get to a little bit later. But then I called it Beacon of Light, because it was really about how she had been in the light in my life, and what was I to do without her? So I was like, well, I can do this, because after I wrote this poem, I had a complete sense of catharsis. And for those of you who have struggled and felt that relief afterwards, I'm really happy for you. And I'm happy for myself that I was able to reach there. And it wasn't until years later where I realized that I could use my experience, this tool of writing poetry, to help others overcome their own suffering. I was really lucky again in that I had a 12th grade English teacher who saw that I was listening, that I was thinking, that I was writing, not turning in homework. And she was like, so I need something to grade. I was like, well, I have this poem. And she came back to me a little while later, and she was like, okay, so forget this class and all of your makeup work. You're going to do the literary magazine, and it's going to be great. And I did, and it was. And and because of Catherine Herner, I really, she saved my life, because she was the first person who stepped in as a non-family member. I mean, I have a lot of teachers in my family, they're wonderful people, but having someone outside of my experience come in and show me that I could have a life out of what I'm doing, and to help me and talk to me and walk me through it, that's everything. So when I moved back to Sacramento after my undergraduate career, I wrote Yolo Swaggins. I was working in the restaurant industry. It was horrible. But then, no, it was really empowering in some ways. Like, when you can be the only woman in a kitchen and hold it down. Anyway, so I had the opportunity through the Sacramento Poetry Center to be a poetry mentor with this group called Real Poets. And they worked with a community project with a therapist within that project. And I would work with youth, honestly, from all ages, really, like 3 to 4, as long as I can sit in a chair, all the way up to, some people came back until they were like 21, technically aged out, but this was just how beneficial it was. And I saw some really, really miraculous things. And I'm going to show you some of those poems a little bit later. But time's a-ticking, and I made a slide. All right, there's the title slide, Mythopoetic Pedagogy. I'm not going to go through all of these because I realized that I just wanted to download so much to you all, and it would probably be way overload. So we'll just stick to the basics. So pedagogy, the method and practice of teaching, especially as an academic subject or a theoretical concept. So that's what pedagogy is, if you were wondering. Mythopoesis, the making of myths. If you break it down, with the Greek roots, mytho and poesis, myth, and to make, or to create. I really like to think of the definition more as to create, because in that sense, poesis, I mean, what isn't in creation? What isn't in the process of being made? And that can just be applied to so many things. In the Kerouac School, we like to make poetics out of everything. Right now, I'm trying to make bacon poetics, but we'll talk about that after. So, all right, so like, what is myth? And I quote Joseph Campbell here because, like, Here with a Thousand Faces really illuminates so much. And it talks about these stories that we're told and explains them as myth and how they work and certain like points in the journey. And when I found this text, it was from a teacher in my undergrad, Cutter Wood, and I was just like, oh my gosh, and I was able to point to chapters and be like, you know, this happened to me in my life, and I really sort of saw the whole like structure of my experience from my mother's diagnosis to her death, and how that was like the dark subconscious for me and emerging out of it. So, you know, I really started to think. I mean, honestly, I've been thinking about mythopoetic pedagogy, I guess, ever since I was a 6-year-old, sitting on my parents' bed listening to Lord of the Rings. But it's been coming here and really helping to define this framework that brings me to you here today. I'm so excited because I know there are just so many modules to this scaffolding that I'm building that I'm really excited, like eco-psychology, early childhood education. There are so many others, but I hope we can talk afterwards. I'm just going to say those to ping them. And then, so there's mythic structures. Thinking back to that 12th grade English class with Catherine Herner, we had Beowulf, we had Hamlet, we had Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye. I don't think I'm going to have time to talk to you about the problem and the fact that those are all like male narratives, but that's a thing. Let's keep focused here. But you know, those structures, they taught me some really important things, like there is life after death, and that is through the stories that we tell each other. That, you know, I don't think it really matters, like, what period you bring them into. If we were to bring Hamlet and, like, bring him here to Boulder, like, he might have the same problems, you know? Think about it, you know, family issues, girlfriend problems, really depressed. Like, hi. So there's solace in that. But then, you know, we're also living in a really hyper-commodified time. And, you know, those mythic narratives, like something that I've asked myself is, like, really, how can we exist in mythic time now? Or how can our time right now be mythic? However you want to lap time. That's a really big question that I have, and it seems to be mostly that instead of like heroes, like mythic heroes, we sort of have these mythic anti-heroes, like Holden Caulfield from Catcher in the Rye, who just, you know, not really quite being able to get on track. And that kind of brings me to this idea of like virtual reality, or psychogeography is what I kind of call eco-psychology. It's hard to see how to apply these frameworks to our lives and learn from them and progress in our own ways. We kind of look for these virtual realities. And I talk about gaming here just because that's my own experience. So like when I wasn't doing homework, I was playing World of Warcraft, but I was writing poems in school, so I don't know. This virtual reality is really what's framing sort of our contemporary narratives. Just as an example that isn't gaming related, like we're here together in the presence, I'm talking to you, but it's also being recorded. And that will become a virtual reality. You know, our social media interactions, that's a virtual reality. And that's also another conversation I would love to have. So, moving on. What does myth do for us? This is a slide that I might kind of skip. I've already talked about it a little bit, and I throw up some terms that I've kind of been using. So like I mentioned, how a lot of stories that we're taught, at least in public education, are really male narratives. But, you know, those are all really good stories. I've learned a lot. Boudica is actually, I forgot to take her off the list, but she was like a Celtic warrior queen. So she's really cool. But then this bottom bullet where it's talking about myth as memoir, that is sort of what I'm positing as a contemporary narrative framework that's really working in support of, how do we write our lives in a way that has some sense of nobility, has some sense of myth and our own agency and mythic power and warriorhood and all that good stuff. And my examples up here are feminist because Audre Lorde, her book Zami, which is excellent, that was really kind of first listed as a biomythography. So please read those, add those to your list. If you don't write them down, I can tell you afterwards. Okay, so I was talking about virtual reality, and that kind of feeds, really, I think, indulges. I think that's the word I want to use, indulges more in this idea of escapism. Sort of like, they talk about in sci-fi and fantasy, willful suspension of disbelief. Like, you gotta make it convincing enough for your readers to know what you're talking about. And I don't necessarily disagree with that, but there's a book in this stack here. I think it's, I don't know, that one. That is talking about Tolkien and how Tolkien actually had this sense of dual-mindedness when it came to reading, engaging, but also being aware of your surroundings, where it's not about escaping and forgetting where you are and even your own identity, but being aware that you are reading this book and how it's affecting you, and you in the space that you're in, if there's a fire in the hearth and a cat on the rug. You know what I mean? So that's really kind of a crucial aspect and difference in this learning, which is more experiential than anything else. I really believe that we all know what we need to know in this life. We just need to know that we know it. And that means using our sense of self to approach our experiences and unlock that. This I just threw up because it's nice to have pictures. Right? I don't know. In a sense that, I was one of those people who really escaped into video games, lost my sense of self, but yet I was also a self in this game and creating a narrative in this virtual reality. And now I'm much more integrated. I'm much more dual-minded when I do log into World of Warcraft, and it's months at a time now. But, it's still fun to go in because I still think it's a very valid way to experience story. All right, so how this opens up writing, aka tools to take away. I really wanted to talk to you guys about how I came, how this developed for me, but also to maybe give you all some tools as well, in the hopes that someday maybe you will become a mentor, whether you seek that out or whether it comes to you. The most important thing about this process is that it's kind of, and I used a pun here, right? Rites of passage. But in the sense that it sort of follows like a basic framework itself, where when you're sitting down with someone, and in my case, I was working with really, really at-risk kids, people who had suffered all kinds of abuse, grief, trauma. And when you sit down and being like, hey, we're gonna write a poem, it's gonna be your poem, that already automatically gives permission. Seek out details and push toward the trauma. I mean, in the sense that poetry is really beautiful in that it works through metaphor. And so oh, this was a really interesting line. Can you expand on that? Sense of, whatever sense is being evoked here. Stick to the framework to avoid triggers. You may not be working with really high-risk populations, but it's something to be mindful of, where it's just hey, there's no judgment, there's no psychoanalysis happening here. We're just writing. This is a poem. It's sounding pretty good so far. Do you want to hear it back? Create a relational understanding between trials of the past and present. I wrote a lot there, but I'll just give an example that I was working with a child once who admitted to wanting to strangle themselves to death. And I was like, but you love to sing, so it's just stress and sing. And he was like, yeah. He was 8. Validate significance of experience and create a sense of completion. Let's see if I can read this one really. I have like 20 seconds. Poem by Meow, Forgiveness. I have forgiven my sister for the stubbornness and attitude. I have forgiven my mom for abandoning me without food. I have forgiven my friend for the arguing and yelling. I have forgiven fear for taking over the sun and light, because I deserve and will get a peaceful mind without anger, because I deserve it for the forgiveness I did. She drew me that. She blossomed. That's a powder puff. And then I had all these 2 other slides. But if you want to know what to read, you can just ask me, and then I know these things. And all right, thank you all so much.